Now, from high atop his desk, get ready to peel it all back and get to the root of the subject. No pun intended. With Paul K. on Wine Talks, where he takes no prisoners and calls it the way he sees it.
Hey, welcome to Wine Talks with Paul K. And we are at a away game today in beautiful Southern California, back in Irvine at the Irvine restaurant, sporting some amazing list of wines. But we're here to have a conversation with Cristina Mariani-May. Introductions in just a second. Wine Talks, of course, available on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Pandora, wherever you hang out for your podcasting, and sponsored by the Original Wine of the Month Club. Got some amazing stories coming up for your way if you're checking out the podcast. Just got done with the Capralian family, whose winery was stolen by the Azerbaijan soldiers on the way into taking over Azerbaijan. Artsakh. So amazing story. You got to listen to that. But not why we're here today. We are here to have a conversation with Cristina. She is the president and CEO of Banfi, one of the well-respected wineries and groups of wineries in Italy as well as America. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So glad we got to put this together with such, urgency and distance, because I traveled, you're traveling. What's going on this week on your travels?
So this week, I'm fortunate to be in beautiful Southern California. Last week, I was in Zurich, which was great, doing some wine tastings, and I passed through my home in New York, and now we're here in Southern California, meeting with some buyers, with some clients, showcasing our range of Brunello di Montalcino, which is where our Castello Banfi wine estate is located in beautiful Toscana, in Tuscany, and we'll be showcasing some of our single vineyards and special clones and selection of our Brunello. So it's going to be a full week of lots of good wine and food. And
is it kind of all right being back on the road after? I know you live in New York, but the pandemic kind of shut all this down. Is it you're sort of back on the street enjoying it, or like, oh my gosh, I got to do this again?
Okay. Bittersweet, right?
Yeah,
I am a world traveler. I love to travel. Like, I open my eyes and I'm like, what city am I in? And that part I love. But I have to tell you, the airlines are packed.
It's nuts.
I mean, it is insane trying to get through the lines, and I'm a million miler, So that part I don't miss, but I will never give up seeing the world. And I'm so blessed to be in the family wine business where we get to meet the most interesting, passionate people from so many. We sell in over 100 different countries. So
I mentioned we were just in New York, and we did not have, well, we actually, I'm totally lying. We had a 6-hour delay when we got to Newark. We had to circle, then we went back to Chicago, waited, and came back. But that was for weather. So let's not blame that on the politics and the problem with labor. But my wife was reading an article that a stewardess wrote about how, like, don't even think you're going to make a plane that's an hour and a half from the one you're landing on. If you're going to change planes,
yes,
like hour and a half. She says, no way. 3 hours minimum. Don't even think about it. If you can drive there in 5 hours, just drive. She's saying, this is all this advice from stewardesses. And please be nice to us, because it's not our fault.
It's not our fault, really. But it is hard to. That part ages us. But listen, it comes with the territory, right? And we wind up in beautiful places with food and wine. So
I've mentioned this before on some other podcasts with some great guests, and we appreciate you being here. Somebody said once, I meet amazing people, I go to amazing places, I drink amazing wines, and I eat amazing food.
What's the problem with that, right? And you get a beautiful scenery. Because especially in the fine wine business, and when we're talking Brunello and our Piemontese wines, I get to go to these gorgeous cities.
Yeah.
And the people are just so knowledgeable about good wines and care so much. And I mean, you really can't find a better profession, hobby. And it's a family business too. And I bring my 3 kids along, and it's a good life.
We're going to talk about the kids here in a second, because given that you're the million miler and all the things you're doing, and then you have 3 children, I don't know how young they are, but how are you doing that? I mean, I have 3 kids.
How do we do it? Lots of good wine. A little Netflix and a hot bath. I'm fortunate that my kids now are 20 years old, 17, and 15. So I don't know how I did it at the time. I was also running marathons. I'm a big type A personality. And I've run over 30, 40 marathons.
Wow.
So I just think I live life on the road kind of, and the kids kind of came along with it. And thank heavens they really looked up to their mom, because they look back now and they're like, you weren't home a lot, but I had a great husband, have a great husband. And I think they really admire what I was doing, and they understand it now.
Yeah, because
but
they're
it's
adults.
really hard when they're little.
Yeah.
But once they grow up, they're like, Mom, you have the coolest life.
Yeah.
And I do. I just brought one to Zurich with me, and yesterday he flew to Cambodia from New York to do a service trip. I mean, you know, you just see the world, you know?
Are they interested in what you're doing?
I hope so. I mean, you know, it's kind of funny because I grew up with a father who just had 2 daughters, and he's like, you know, didn't really pressure any of us to go into the business. But then what happened was I was living in Italy after university, and I was like, wait a second, I can interview with my dad and get the most amazing, beautiful job when everybody else is going into consulting or investment banking. And I was like, I'd be crazy. So I think they're all going to fall into it because it's so in our DNA. And we're so proud of the estate we have in Tuscany. And, you know, it really has to be cherished. So
many, particularly Italian winemakers, which is very interesting to me, but French, of course, but anybody from the European old world part of the wine business, many of the children go off and try to do something else. I've had investment bankers on the show. I've had MBAs. I've had doctors, you know, biologists, and they all get called back, you know, to the soil and the farming, and I think that is the DNA.
I think it really is. You just feel like this greater sense of purpose, you know, sustainability, protection of land, heritage. Plus, it's the pride of ownership and terroir that you can't get when you're working in the commercial sector as much. It's a pride of bringing it from your own land all the way through to customers around the world and talking about good food and wine. And there's it's a sense of accomplishment.
Is that when you got the bug? Like you graduated from the university in Italy?
No, I went to Georgetown University. Oh. So I'm American. I was born and raised in New York. I went to Georgetown and then I went Columbia MBA, and then got the bug. And lived in Italy during college.
That's the case. At some point, and mine was like I was working with my dad. I've been doing this 35 years. It took like 10 years for me to go, you know, this is pretty cool. Anyway, at that point, it's business. I was selling stuff, and I was a sales guy by trade. But at some point, it does tell you, look what you're doing, and look what you get who you get to impact, and the people you get to meet, and the things you do to understand. The knowledge base is phenomenal, right?
It's incredible, and the people you meet. We have a beautiful Relais and Chateau Hotel on our property, Casella Banfi, a Michelin star restaurant. Yes, okay. Stunning. And the people who come from there, they're from all over the world. Wow. And it's this real melting pot of the most fascinating travelers. And they're people with wanderlust, just like I have. And, you know, we come together, we sit over a glass of wine, we do this big jazz and wine festival every summer. It's one of the biggest out of Rome, and they bring it to the medieval town of Montalcino. And it's magical under the 12th century fortress. Like, you know, people dream of Italy. Yes. Obviously, it's so gorgeous. But when you're actually there, you realize how unique it is. And it really is a place that captures everybody's hearts. So
all this stuff to talk about here, like women in wine and sustainability and all this stuff. But I'm still stuck on this part because it is the most fascinating, and it's the hardest to define. And that is, what is it? What is it about wine? It doesn't happen with bourbon. It doesn't happen with beer. It doesn't happen with scotch. It only happens with that ethereal glass of wine that connects you to something. The best I can come up with is it connects you to the soil, it connects you to a place.
Right? The people.
I don't know.
The place. Well, I think having grown up in the wine business, so just a little bit, can I give you just a little background on how it's connected? So my company's name is Banfi. My last name is Mariani, but my grandfather came into the business or started the business over 100 years ago, so 1919. But he was a poor American, Italian immigrant in America, and he was sent back to Italy to live with his aunt. And his aunt's name was Teodelinda Banfi. And Teodelinda was the head of the household for the Archbishop of Milan, who then was elected to become Pope Pius XI. Wow. So when he was moving into the Vatican City, he wanted my great aunt Teodelinda Banfi and my grandfather to move with him But no women who weren't nuns were allowed to move into the Vatican at the time. So this is early 1900s. So he had a special dispensation because he's the Pope and he could. And so my great aunt moved as the first woman, and she ran his entire household. So she ran the quarters, the food, the wine, selected his robes, whether they were red or white.
Wow.
And she raised my grandfather for 10 years, from the age of 10 to 20. He came back to America and started importing products from America, named it Banfi after the woman he loved as an aunt.
Wow.
And actually, when she died, she was the first female to be buried within the Vatican City. So she was not a good-looking woman by any means. I always laugh because she lived with thousands of men that were celibate. But in all joking aside, so the heritage for our family goes really deep.
Yeah, really.
You know, it goes back to the culture, the church, the education of wine. And I think when you go back, and our heritage on our property is Etruscan. You know, we have a 12th century fortress, and parts of it was 800 years AD. When we came into the territory as Americans, so we had the wine importing business in America for many years, still do, and that's why I live in New York. But when we came, and my dad built as an American, which was very unusual to go back to Italy.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, all the Italians were coming to California in the 60s and 70s.
That's right. They were stone layers. And
they were developing Napa in Northern California, but he did the opposite. So we went to this sleepy town of Montalcino in southern Tuscany, and most of it was virgin soil, which we ended up creating a wine estate from scratch. So what was fascinating is because when they started tilling the soil, we have 7,100 acres of land, is
wow.
It's one of the biggest contiguous owned properties.
7,000 acres plus.
7,100. Only a third of it is vineyards, but it's the size of Manhattan. I mean, it's big. It's the biggest single estate.
And upper
Yeah. So you think of it, you have Soho, you have Upper East, you have the East River, you have Uptown, Midtown. So when we went in, most of it had never been planted to vines. It had been maybe agricultural. This is 1970. Proper. And this is in Montalcino proper. So there was only about 10 producers at the time. Today there's 260. But when we went into the soil, what we were digging up was all Etruscan artifacts. We have a museum on the property.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Everything dug up was historical.
That is fascinating.
So it's like when you go back, you're like, there's just so much history that you want to protect.
So you wonder, that's rare to a certain extent, right? That you have that history, but it's not rare for the wine industry. I mean, I'm Armenian. They found a 6,000-year-old winery intact with shoes and everything a few years ago, and you're thinking, wow, this beverage has been here for this long, and it's probably stimulated the senses today as it did then,
right? And
so. Like Catherine de' Medici, the Florence, she came to France in the 12th century, right about then.
And introduced the fork.
Yeah, and taught them how to cook, right?
Yes.
So don't tell the French that. That's not.
We can. I'm Italian-American.
So tell me about the 7,000 acres, since we're on the subject.
Sure.
1/3 under vine. Other crops?
Oh, absolutely. We're one of the largest supplier of plums to the European community.
Wow.
So we prunes.
Crops.
So we grow a lot of plums. And prunes are used for sweeteners and all different. So we're one of the largest suppliers. We have a hunting preserve, obviously. We have the highest cultivation of forest to highest ratio of forest to cultivated land out of any estate in all of Italy.
Oh, that's
so
amazing.
when you talk about sustainability, this is what we do. So we don't over farm the land. A lot of it is still a hunting preserve. And then of course we grow the wheat and we make our own pasta and we have honey and the olive groves, tons of olive groves, and a balsameria where we make our own balsamic vinegar.
Wow. Is there a Banfi pasta on the market?
We sell it over in Italy. It's very...
Oh, great. Thanks.
Yes.
Yeah,
So no, we bring it in here for special guests, but our focus is the wine. But even about 8 years ago, they found, when I talk about the land and its uniqueness, we're at about 1,100 feet above sea level. So we're near the coast of the Mediterranean, only about 20 miles, but we're up high in the hills of Tuscany.
Is there a coastal influence in the wines?
Oh, very much so. Yeah. Very much so, especially in the whites. We have the Vermentino, a Pinot Grigio, but we're high up, and about 8 years ago or so, there were archaeologists digging in the vineyards, and they always find fossils of shells, but they found this really high concentration of shark teeth, ancient shark teeth. And they said, let's dig a little deeper. And they went only about 5 feet below the surface. And lo and behold, they dug up a 30-foot long, completely intact whale fossil.
Whoa.
It was 30 feet, 5 million years old from the Pliocene era.
Wow.
It was the greatest discovery of this era archaeologically in history. So this goes to show how rich and diverse and the maritime climate on the soil of Tuscany, and particularly for Sangiovese, which grows so well where we are. So we had BBC and CNBC and CNN all come in to talk about climate change and how much it's evolved. And we now have archaeologists on our property as well permanently in an exhibit still working on these fossils.
That's amazing because I think about this. I was talking to a winemaker on the French Riviera, and he says, it used to be a much longer walk to the ocean as it was, even as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And I was telling him, where we hang out in Hermosa Beach in Southern California, it's now a longer walk. So he's like, it's gotten shorter for him and longer for us. And the atmosphere only has so much water between the earth and what's in the air. So all this water that was at one time covering your vineyard and producing all this incredible rich nutrient soil to grow grapes. So how much impact do you think this glass of wine we're looking at today that stuff has on the?
A lot. So what makes Sangiovese very particular to Montalcino is a lot of the limestone that's in the soil. And the limestone is coming from the calcification of all the sea life that really lies as a maritime bed. And as I said, when you find a 5 million year old whale fossil just about 5 to 10 feet under the surface, it means that fossil had laid down to rest on the bottom of the seafloor. So the seafloor 5 million years ago was not that deep. So that's why there's shells everywhere.
It's wild.
And it's wild, but that's the calcium-rich soil that's lending the nutrients, the different vitamins to the wine and the vines, and why they taste very particular to our region, and why, like a Sangiovese grown in California, Sonoma or Reggio Emilia or anywhere else is going to taste, even a Chianti is going to taste very different.
Is it Sangiovese Grosso?
No, so Sangiovese Grosso is one of the clones that goes into Brunello. So we have here in front of us Brunello di Montalcino from Banfi, but it's a single vineyard called Vigna Marochetto. Mm-hmm. It's a new release for us, and this is the 2016. So just a little bit of education on Sangiovese clones, because we actually wrote the book and put it into, documented it. But Sangiovese is one of the largest, Paul, clonal grape variety families that exist. So there's 650 different types of Sangiovese clones. And Sangiovese really quickly mutates to its climatic and terroir conditions. So like a Pinot Noir is similar in that it has so many variations and is so different depending on where it's grown. So when we came into this mostly virgin soil in this poor hilltop town at the time, Montalcino, we didn't know which clones to really plant because nobody had ever done the research. So the research had been started in Chianti Classico, but that was being done by a consortio. And it was being done for Chiantis, which can have up to 15% of other wines blended, different aging techniques. Brunello has to be 100% Sangiovese and aged used to be 5 years, now it's 4 years for a minimum of 2 years in wood. So there's very strict regulations. So we said, well, which clones are going to make a better Brunello? We don't really know. Nobody's done this work. So we started a 25-year research project, and we narrowed it down on our own property to 15 clones that best represent the characteristics for a Brunello. And we're the first single producer in Italy ever to register that work with the Italian government. So now today there's 45 nationally registered clones of Sangiovese, and 15 of those were founded at Banfi. So we want to share the research, have the quality of tide come in. One of those clones is Sangiovese Grosso. The others are all different types. So it's really a combination depending on the terroir.
Individual Latin names, I suppose. So you've mentioned Pinot, and that's an important piece of information for the listeners. You know, we always tout that Pinot Noir is probably one of the great conduits of where it's grown.
Mm-hmm.
But tasting this single vineyard Brunello, I've never tasted such terroir in a Brunello. And
yeah,
I taste this whale. You know,
yes, we say, do you taste the balena? Balena being the whale. You get a little blubber, a little fat.
But there's a certain savoriness about it that seems like it's come from the offshore of the Mediterranean Sea. I mean, it's just fascinating wine. And I don't remember tasting it prior when they were in the office, but I'm blown away by that terroir character. And that's an important part of our storytelling, is that this is what we're trying to do, get to the table an expression of who we are.
Well, I think that's so important because, you know, it's so easy to get caught up in the commercialism of the wine when you walk into a shop and how you find which wine's what's best. But what's even more important is to find what works for the territory. So after 30 years of research of different clones, we really understand what works now. And this is not stopping. I mean, you know, you experiment with the wood and you experiment with the fermenters. And what we found is every different plot of soil can give very different characteristics to the Brunello. So this Brunello, which is called Vigno Marochetto, was first launched with this current vintage of 2016, which is a 5 out of 5-star vintage. Really has unique characteristics of a very calciferous, rocky, well-drained, higher altitude for our estate, very small vineyard. And we want to show you how Brunellos, as you said, just like Pinot Noirs, take on completely different characteristics depending on their soil
So Brunello
location.
is 2 years in barrel, 2 years in bottle before you can release it.
Yes, that's a classic
Minimum.
Brunello.
Right. And then you said something really interesting, the 25 years of experimenting. That's almost like young. Right? When it comes to like, what's going to happen with this vineyard? What are we going to get out of the soil? What should we be growing in 25 years is noble? I've heard people say, we're not going to know for 100 years, particularly in a new vineyard, because all the emaciations, all the things that can happen in the weather, all the things that happen in the soil and the picking conditions amount to some knowledge and experience that we have to then cultivate to the next year. And you only get one chance a year.
One chance.
I mean, it's so slow, right?
And you say, why do we love the wine? You were coming back to it. What's so special about it? I think it's that.
Right.
It's the forced patience we have to have.
It's true. It's forced patience. There's a winery in Armenia, oddly, again, and they had Michel Roland as their consulting enologist. And he said, it was a brand new, they had never grown grapes in this part of Armenia. And he says, okay, I think you're right. I think we can grow stuff here, but, you know, let's give it 100 years. Well, the young lady's 35. She's like, well, I don't have 100 years to figure this out. But with focused experimenting like you're doing, I can see the result in this glass is pretty fascinating.
And I think we can't rest on that, right?
No, absolutely not.
And when you said 50, 25 years is young, well, we had some vineyards that we put into our reserva called Poggialoro, which is a 50-year-old vineyard. So we use that as kind of the main research vineyard. But I think what we have to do in the wine world is, you were talking about Michel Roland coming in. When we started this research project, we worked with the University of Bordeaux, the University of Pisa, University of Milan, Emile Pinot, Ribillon Gaillou, all the great enologists of the world. So this was not a project just by Banfi at its location. This was a project where we used one of the largest contiguous properties in all of Italy, our estate, with 29 different types of soil, which is a huge range. And we said, let's bring the experts in from all over the world. We brought in Chilean because we were working with Conchi Toro. We brought them all in. And we did this as a think tank, So
That's
what
great.
we can do is, it's an ongoing process, but it's just not our knowledge. It comes from generations before. We have a foundation. Twice a year, we put on an educational summit called Sangue di Giove, which is Sangiovese, the blood of Jove, the god Jove. And we bring together enologists from all over the world and agronomists as a continuation of a think tank. So it's a constant evolution, a constant learning process. Camaraderie, teamwork, sharing results. Absolutely. That's the wine world. You can't,
It's always been like that.
It has. And I think what other industries do you really always have like that?
There was I had a woman on the show years ago. Her name was Joanne Dupuis, a couple years ago. Very famous Napa Valley. She was responsible for Steven Spurrier finding the wines for the Jesuit Paris. She's an unsung hero. She's 94 years old today. She's great. But she was the first woman to speak in front of the Napa Valley Vintners Association. And when you said that there's camaraderie and this group comes in, this is that group in the Napa Valley. It was Brother Timothy, it was Louis Martini, Robert Mondavi, all getting together and having a glass of wine and talking about what we're going to do and sharing the secrets and what they've learned from what they were growing. So I think that's a fascinating part of the industry. Yeah. Do you sense any conflict between, let's say, the Tuscans and the Piemontese? I mean, you're in both worlds, so you're kind of bridged that. You don't see that very often, but that's kind of cool.
Yes. Well, in Italy, every region is its own country.
Of course.
So yes, you do see that very much so within Italy. Outside the Italian market, less so. We're very blessed, I think, in Tuscany that it's kind of the leader of the Italian wines, just because people are so in love with what Tuscany embodies.
Right.
So I don't see so much of a competition with Piedmont or within the producers, because we each make wines that are very unique to our own. Barolos are going to be completely different from Brunello. We have a winery up in Piedmont, but we produce white wines. And we do the Gavi, we do our sparkling wines. We do a beautiful red sparkling wine called Rosa Regale, which is made from the Brachetto grape. It's like red and sweet and chilled, and
I think I bought that.
It's so good.
Yeah,
it comes in this very beautiful bottle that's like scalloped.
Yeah,
and
I think I bought that.
It's and it's very light and crisp. So I don't see too much competition within Italy among the regions, because the regions really respect each other because of the history and the differentiation between the styles.
My favorite whites of all time, and we're going to talk about Burgundy a second as well, but my favorite whites are those indigenous Italians, both in the Northeast, Northwest, and the Umbrians and the Campanians. I mean, there's some amazing grapes and how they bring up the soil and stuff. But how do we teach? This is a very important thing. Is not just in Italy, France as well, any part of Europe. There's such variety and such interesting wines and such interesting stories. And then we see 19 crimes on the shelf and they're buying this junk. In fact, the other day I was in the market. I love to do this. I'm waiting to be kicked out. And I want them to kick me out so I can videotape them kick me out. But I'm next to the 19 crimes. I'm saying, like, the only crime is they make this stuff, So, but how do we teach the world and the Americans and the Europeans and the Chinese and the Japanese, whoever wants to consume quality wine, that there's this whole other world that is expressive of its location and its time, not Josh, 19 crimes.
Yeah, being that this is my life's work, I agree with you. I think it is a lifelong commitment to education, and it's to connecting. The wine business is about people and stories, right? So I think, and it is about, as people really come into it, it's about authenticity. Mm-hmm. And it's that authenticity, if you can sell it and talk about it, like we are here today, that says, oh, I understand this story. I know why this wine is meant to be. Now, yes, you have your value wines that are popular, and I don't personally love this taste, but I think because my palate's more developed. But I never poo-poo those wines, because they also introduce people to wines. They're affordable and they can get them in. But once you're there, you realize what a breadth of wines are out there to explore. But why this one? You walk into a shelf and a retail store, there's too many wines. There's too many. Why? It's mind-boggling. So I think what is very important for us still, and it takes a lot of patience again, but it's almost like a hand sell of each story. And each one, as you're telling the stories, Paul, the winemakers and their wines, each one has this special, unique gem to it. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're kind of selling. And that's why partly for us, education is key. We do a lot of foundations, a lot of scholarships for young people, but also the hospitality, because more people travel and want to travel than they might be into wine. Mm-hmm. But we have this beautiful hotel and castle in Italy where people come, and then they really start to understand it. And even if they can't come, it's like Napa or Sonoma or Santa Barbara or Paso. Even if you can't get there, you can look it up on the internet and dream. Right?
Well, I've been to the pyramids, at least on Google Earth.
Yeah, exactly. But you get that sense of you want to escape. So if you open up a bottle of wine and you're looking at these slideshows or, images, you get that in the bottle. If you go to a 19 Crimes or whatever other wines you mentioned, where are you going to see that? Where do you go to see
augmented reality label?
I didn't say it. Maybe you did. But,
no,
you know,
I'm good. We got to put you on the label, and you do augmented reality. Martha Stewart's talking about it. You can be on your label.
Well, this is real. This is this is a real winery. So I'm proud of that.
No, I think you're right on. I mean, it is a hand sell no matter what we do, and a hand sell just like when you walk in the shop. I went into the shop in New York when we were there over the weekend, 2 weekends ago. And one thing that's interesting to me, I don't recognize many of the brands that are in the New York shelves because they don't get to the West Coast. But I took a gamble on a vintage and a district. I wanted a Veronese wine, so I went to, a Valpolicella Ripasso. And here I am making that same decision that you're just talking about. I'm reasonably educated consumer, but I'm guessing because I haven't tasted it yet. And I don't have a story to reflect on.
Right.
And guess what? It was very good. And I felt really stupid because I should be able to do better than that. So I had to dump that bottle. Thank goodness the Bordeaux I bought was good. But something important that this is telling me in the glass, and that is preserving the cultures of these districts. And Europe is so good at that. France has their Appellation Contrôlée, so with butter and with milk and of course with wines. Does Italy have that sort of protection? I mean, obviously, clearly appellated wines, but is there cultural protection to make sure that the dried meats of each district?
Absolutely. So for the food district, it's for the foods, it's called DOP, denomination of the province. So you have that for the mozzarella and the cheeses and the meats. For the wine, it's the DOCG, denomination of controlled origin and garantita. Now, it's not a guarantee of quality necessary, but very, very strict standards, similar to the AOC in France, ruled by the European Union, and then the Italian DOC committee, but very strict production standards, irrigation standards. So unlike California wines or New World wines, where really anything can go. You can add water, you can add sugar, you can add oak chips, and you don't have to put it on the label. In Europe, it's complete opposite, which is maybe why people have a love affair with Italian wines, because they're very authentic in that sense. But for example, Brunello di Montalcino, it's a minimum 2 years in wood and 2 years in the bottle before release. It cannot be, the vines cannot be irrigated after 3 years. So if they're baby vines, they can be irrigated. But after that, you have to get special permission from the consortio. It is so highly regulated, which is a blessing and a curse, right? A curse in the sense that, oh my gosh, we're stuck within these strict regulations. But at the same time, it's what protects it and makes it unique and authentic and doesn't over-commercialize it. So why does the buffalo mozzarella from Naples taste so special compared to what you might find in, from your local U.S. market?
Of course, being a New World person, being born and raised in Southern California, I look at the cultural history of Europe and a huge Francophile and look at it and go, wow, it's so cool, But then if you talk to like Jacques Lardier from Louis Jadot, he says, yeah, but the New World, it's an open palette. You can do whatever you want and you can experiment and test and have fun. And there's a great book by Dr. Paul Friedman. His name, he's a Yale professor of medieval servitude, which is not my favorite subject, but he's also a critic of American food. He's written great books on the stories. But how we've screwed up American food, how Howard Johnson's and the freeways, now you can have the same hamburger in Massachusetts as you can in Southern California, and that kind of deregionalized everything. And in the 80s with the Jonathan Waxmans and the Michael McCartys and even La Pavillon in New York, that started to come back, and we're starting to have this regional
the farm to table again.
Yes, and it's so important to them. It's sort of a hybrid of what's going on.
Couldn't agree more.
So you mentioned two things. One, I just had an interview with a guy in Austria, and they actually have to submit samples to the government to get a lot number to put on the label to show it's guarantee of quality.
Yes. Same in Italy.
Oh, you do that?
Yes.
You do the same thing?
Yes, it's very regulated.
Wow.
So there's lot numbers from the consortio. So consortios are the group that oversees the DOCG committees, and you do have to submit lots and everything's carefully.
How do you keep track of all that?
Good team, and they've been doing it a long time. And don't forget, as you said, Paul, we weren't raised doing it that way.
No, right, exactly.
So we don't think that way, but our team is all Italian winemakers and Europeans. They're raised that way. It's just the way to do it. But it's completely different. I mean, looking back over 40 years ago, would I have said, Dad, why didn't you just build a winery in California? It would have been a lot easier as Americans. Yeah. Why did you go into this like historic, old, dusty kind of territory at the time? He said, because I was just so fascinated. I had such a love affair with Italy, and the wines I knew from Bordeaux and the Mosel and the Rhine and Burgundy, said still nothing compared to me. So
he's right. I mean, come on, let's be serious. If we talk about the fact that, let's just say that Michel Rolland was right, it's 100 years before you even know what you think you're doing, when they've got hundreds of years of experience to hand down generationally. Yes. And we're barely on 75 to 100 years. I mean, actually 76 is kind of when, people started figuring it out.
Right. And everything changes in the meantime. There's no water. It's too hot. Yeah, the alcohol levels are climbing astronomically around the world.
Tell me about that for a second. Climate change. You touched on it a little bit, but this is not a political show. So let's just agree that there is, the temperature's up and that your farming practices are different.
Yes. So I was actually honored to go to the Porto Protocol right before COVID with Al Gore, and it was in Portugal. And I spoke on behalf of the wine sector, myself and Miguel Torres, on sustainability and the climatic changes. So what we have to do is just constantly adjust mostly our viticultural techniques. So our trellising is constantly changing. We're doing this more albarella trellising, where we're opening up the grapes lower to the ground. Trellising, fermentation. We have new fermentation rooms that are our tanks are half wood and half stainless steel. So they were actually patented by Banfi, and it's cool. No one had ever done this before.
You're upsetting the whole world now.
So you have to look at every single aspect in that production process. Yeah. So you can ferment in the wood, because the particularly the reds from Tuscany are getting warmer and warmer and higher alcohol and higher tannins. So we have to ferment very gently in the French oak to bring down those softer tannins, but we still need the ease of use and the cleanliness of stainless steel. So the cap and bottom is stainless and the sides are wood. And that's patented by us because they needed to figure out the engineering of a silicone gasket that can expand and contract with the wood to keep an inert seal in the fermentation tanks. So it's these little things that you keep. I mean, let's admit it, it's chemistry and technology also working hand in hand with the viticulture.
And that always confuses me too a little bit. There's two things, and I would dovetail off the climate change for a second, but at the same time that we're suffering through this, and we don't know if it's just a blitz, or there's that mini ice age in Champagne that caused problems for years on growing Champagne grapes, but we don't know if it's coming back. But there are now parts of Burgundy that are creating much better grapes than they did prior. English has amazing sparkling wines. They're quite good. Stephen Spurrier's, Bright Valley. And now they're even allowing to grow things like Touriga Nacional in Bordeaux. Right. Like, how is that bucking, this world of tradition? It's just interesting. Not that I have a position on either way. But one of the things I asked, if it's intriguing to you, let's say we go back 100 years, not even, let's go 200 years even, and you bring forward a fresh bottle of something made by the monks. So let's go to Burgundy. We're going to talk about Burgundy in a second. That they knew and they figured out that their terroir changes and that this grape across the street from that grape is a little bit different, a little bit better, whatever they want to call it. And they had nothing but time on their hands. They didn't have, expanding silicone gaskets to help them understand things, right? So void of the technology, isn't it still the same business? Isn't it the same thing? We still ferment a grape. They probably used phenolic ripeness back then without the refractometers and things like that. They just knew. But would it be fascinating to taste something like that?
Well, a good friend of my father's, Hugh Johnson, when you speak of.
Yes.
So my dad
well-known wine
helped
guy.
sponsor the history of wine that he made.
Really?
Hugh Johnson's,
wow.
Yep. So Hugh came to our house when we were young, and his son Red now is very involved in the British wine business. But he came to the house and he showed to my father and he said, I have something for you to taste. Taste it. And he said, my dad was like, this is disgusting. What is it? It tastes like seawater and stuff. And he said, it's how the Roman legions used to take their wine. I boiled down some of the wine. They'd boil it down into a concentrate and then add seawater to, fill it back up again because they had to travel lightly.
That's so cool.
And he said, this is how it would taste and this is what they would drink. So I think they knew even back then, and you go back to the Etruscans and so on, they did understand it.
Yes.
They just didn't have as advanced technology and chemistry to make it as appealing. Now, remember, we have to ship it, we have to export it, sits at ports, but they knew back then that how to bring it down to a great concentrate.
That's really interesting.
So it's really interesting. So the stories and the history of wine from Hugh Johnson, it's amazing. So they did know back then, and we've taken it upon ourselves, I think, to build upon that.
So what's the objective? I mean, we're creating these technologies, the optical sorters, the lasers are no longer processing the wine. I think somebody told me the other day, well, there's no such thing as vegan wine because there's bugs in the grapes when they pick them.
Are bugs? But I thought they weren't quite vegan. I don't know. I don't.
But what are we trying to do? Are we just trying to create absolutely the best beverage we can create that represents where it's from as we can, or just the wine with the best, with the best balance? It's just a pursuit of expression?
Yeah, well, I think that depends on each producer, right? Everybody has a different philosophy. For Banfi and for my family, our goal from the beginning was to create wines that consumers would love. And think of the consumer first and think about what they would appreciate from Italian wines around the world. So we were the first to open up the markets for Brunello because Brunellos used to be very hard and austere and took years to soften and develop. So we were the first to go into Asia, all over the world with it. And what we wanted to see is we wanted to change the style slightly. We wanted to make wines that had depth and length and character, but you didn't have to use a tweezer to pull the splinters out of your mouth because they used to have to be aged too long. So that was an intention of ours. But again, that's a philosophy of the producer. So what we try to achieve in our Super Tuscans and our Banfi wines is a finesse and an elegance, but a ripeness where you can enjoy it today. But it just lingers on the palate. They're meant to go with food, right? That's the way they're presented, but it also can be aged for many, many years.
So I use, instead of pulling splinters out of your mouth, I use chewing on a popsicle.
Okay, same thing, right?
Popsicle
same
stick,
thing, right? Which I don't want to do. My life's too short. I don't want to wait that long.
There's I still got to get to some of this political stuff like the women in wine and things, but I got a couple other subjects here.
I'm all yours.
I was reading an article yesterday about, I don't know if you get the Louis Perdue newsletter, but it's mostly industry articles that he pulls together. I'm not sure there is a Louis Perdue, but he puts a list of things. And one of the articles was taking influencers in our world of marketing and who they're attracting on what platforms. And it's clear that the 25 to 34 group, the millennials, are going to be important buyers of our wines. And if not already, the boomers. And my wife just did a whole study of our membership, and we have people from the 70s still, but obviously they're not going to be around much. They signed up with my father, and some in the 80s, a little more in the 90s, of course. And so we've got to figure out how to get to these things. Are you seeing in your business that they're responding to things like Brunello, single vineyard Brunellos? Are we working on getting to them? How are we handling this?
Yes. So as I travel the globe, I definitely see in the European markets, they are, because they're raised on wine. I think that the shame is then you come to America, not to politicize it, but people just don't understand it. And it's a relationship between the two. So what I find is it's much more challenging here. It's an uphill climb, I think, for all wines as spirits become more and more craft and they consider them almost like wine. But what I love about our estate and our philosophy is we don't just make, even though we're in this great, like Napa Valley of Tuscany, we don't just make a Brunello di Montalcino at an expensive price. We make everyday wines like Centenay, which is our everyday Super Tuscan blend for good wine for $12. We make Rosa Regali, a red, sparkling sweet, and we have that in a red, white, and rosé. So I think what our job is to introduce the new generation through social media, through the marketing campaigns as well, but mostly, from glass to mouth and love at first sip.
What it is.
And it's a job that requires a lot of energy and standing behind tables, but that's it. And once they taste it, they're like, yum, I had no idea wine could taste this way. Yeah. So you got to bring them into those softer style wines that can be chilled. And then you take them from there.
Get that aha moment out of them.
Exactly. And we all need to do it in our industry. Right. And you can't do it with crappy wine that's not well made, because then they're going to wake up with a headache and they're going to say, see, I knew I didn't like red wine or white wine because it's all sugar and fake oak and, sulfites. And then they're going to go back to a good tequila.
It just hit me when you're saying that my parents grew up, they were antique. My dad was a pharmacist in the wine trade, but their hobby was antiques, silver antiques primarily. And even my generation would appreciate that stuff. I still love it.
Right.
But they want to buy IKEA furniture. They could care less about Cargis and all these other brands that used to be out. They don't care.
No,
so how do we apply that to the wine business and marketing to them to understand that? And I think you're right on. They put that glass in their mouth and they're not tasting something that they bought like 19 Crimes.
Right.
And they go, ooh.
Oh, this is wine? I like this.
That. Right.
And, just the way your palate develops for cheese. But believe me, we have a beautiful old estate in New York that's a 1927 Elizabethan manor house, and it's our office. And it's full of all English antiques.
Wow.
And when you try to see if there's a market for them, everybody
cares.
Wants white, modern, neutral colors. And I'm like, what happened to the beautiful tables and 18th century clocks? And, but then again, that will come back around too, because they are artifacts. But back to kind of the wines, it's, you got to talk about them. You got to taste them and talk about them. Otherwise, they don't really care.
And somebody said, like in this case, in this Brunello here, which has this wonderful Mediterranean offshore breeze character to it. It's just every time I taste it, I was fascinated by it. Like, point that out to them and say, hey, do you sense this? If you don't, it's okay. But this is what's happening in this and why. And then they go, yeah, I got this whale story. And they're like, whoa, wait a minute. This is pretty cool. It's not in a box, I want to switch gears just for a second on it. One of my in-laws has a little vineyard in his house in the valley of Southern California, non-appellated part of Los Angeles. In fact, all of Los Angeles is not appellated. And he planted 100 vines, and he made a Cabernet, and he sent it off to cups to crush. He made a wine, a perfectly palatable wine. The daughter, who's now 13 or 14, starting next week as an internship at the Wine of the Month Club because she has fallen in love with this industry. And the women in wine movement is an important issue. You've been honored by, I don't know what the acronyms stand for, WINWSA.
Yes,
but is that job done yet? And do we need to encourage young ladies to get into this industry?
I think we do always more and more. I mean, I see more women taking leadership roles, being active, especially in the distributor level, in the production level. So I think it is evolving. But the challenging thing about our industry, and I will admit this, is that the hours you put into it, it's round the clock, right? So it's not like you're working an office job. You go out, you do tastings on the weekends. You do them every wine festival, weekends, night times, dinners. So it's interesting. I do a lot of work with culinary and hospitality students with the wine. And I was up at the Culinary Institute of America and being like, isn't it hard for women, same thing, to go into the restaurant business because of the hours and raising a family if you want one day? They said, well, most of the women here, they go into more the bakery cafe business because it's daytime hours. So I think one thing that our industry is trying to morph a little more is to have a balance, a work-life balance. And so when you have these events that Vin Italy, it would run for a wine trade show in Italy for 5 or 6 days straight, all day. It's too much for us, especially post-pandemic. You know what I mean? So I think it's just a matter of knowing what you want in life, finding the balance. But if you love the product and what you're selling, hey, there's nothing better in this life.
I have a daughter in Albany.
She
was in Manhattan. She was the boulanger at Benno when Jonathan Benno had his restaurant open, and she was a line cook at Lincoln when Benno was running it, and he took her because she's a French trained baker. She had a baby. We just went and saw him last weekend, and she's pregnant with another one, but she can't. At the same time, she's looking at little cafes in Albany that might be for sale for lease because she can't stay away from.
Exactly, because she's in love with it. But she can have one, and you can run it during the day and close at a decent hour at night. Whereas if you were to open, a dining restaurant, then you're going to be there till 2 a.m.
What's hilarious is she sent pictures this morning from the cafe she was looking at, and most of the pictures have the stroller in it.
Oh,
and her hand on the stroller, the baby's in the stroller.
GoPro on the baby's head.
This young lady here, Natalie, she's embarking on a salad dressing venture she's working with. She's on the phone all the way down here trying to figure out how to package this thing. And so I think it's inspiring to do that. So Win with it. What does it stand for? What does it do?
The Women in Wine National. I forgot the association. So what it does is it recognizes, and I've gotten a lot of different recognition, Forbes and Fortune 50 most powerful women in wine. But really what it recognizes women who are kind of pioneering in their different sectors in the wine and spirits industry. And where it's been more challenging kind of for me is that even though this is a family business, which I inherited, so it's not to say, I had to work my way up from the bottom, but anybody who's in a family business knows how challenging they can also be. And I'm third generation family business, not easy. I'm managing, with all the cousins and the shareholders. And so part of it was getting through all that and being strong and brave to be like, I love this so much. And when others said, I want my money out, having to be the business owner and the CEO to figure out how to do that where everybody's peaceful. It's a big feat. So I wear the business hat there. And then also managing teams internationally is tough, because you're dealing with different cultures. The Italian culture is changing. It's a little more chauvinistic than the American culture.
A little.
A lot.
French as well,
dealing with that has been a challenge. But, so I think all in all, women are recognized just because we're trying to wear so many hats because we still run the house. I mean, you have family, you have children. We're still kind of in charge at the end of the day of doing the dishes and getting the kids to camp.
That's it, right?
Yeah, it's still our role. So we just have to juggle and thank heavens we have good wine surrounding us, as I always say.
So this
to help us get through this.
My daughter, I said to her, she's sort of quiet. She's the quiet of the three kids. And she says, I said, well, you like being in the kitchen and getting up at 3 a.m. and baking breads. I said, you're going to need a front man. She says, you're going to have to interview. I'm like, oh, gee, thanks.
Yeah, exactly. Because, my most challenge, I think, in business is that I love people. I'm a people person. I love, and putting on that different hat of manager versus just a pure passion-driven business. I think a lot of people who are either artists, and I'm not saying I'm an artist, but they're passionate about their baking or they're passionate about their marketing, that you also forget, oh my gosh, I have to manage all these people now. And that's the one part of the job that any of us in any sector could totally do without.
Yeah, we want to
we just want to enjoy our product and have fun. My gosh. And now we have to go give a, business review.
You're out where I'm right now.
So that's the part I think that, I think that I do get recognized as a woman because I've overcome that third generation shift. I've protected the business. We're not selling. We're international. We run around the world, but we do it because I believe in the beauty of it and I believe in the people that it connects us with.
Well, I have to say, there's people waiting up by the door to meet you, and so we have to wrap this up. But I will say, clearly the passion in your conversation about what you're doing and how you're doing it is reflected in the bottle, which is the most important part.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you.
It's such an interesting story. There's so much more to talk about. I hope next time I come to New York, you come to the hotel and we'll sit in a room and talk some more because this has been extraordinarily interesting. And I think for the listeners, they're going to find more questions to ask.
Well, I hope they do. And just know to come visit us, you, Paul, and your listeners, come to Montalcino, visit us at Castello Banfi, castellobanfi.com, see the Michelin star restaurant, the hotel, and come experience it firsthand. And rather than New York or Southern California, let's all go to the Tuscan hillside.
Not sure I can convince the family doing that, but I guess we could really bend their arm.
Oh, so I don't know. You can probably convince them once you get those babies out of the carriages.
Exactly. Thank you again. Cheers.
Thank you. Salute.
Salute.
Salute. Cent'anni.
Thank you for listening to Wine Talks with Paul Kalamkarian. Don't forget to subscribe because there's more great interviews on their way. And of course, all these podcasts are sponsored by the Original Wine of the Month Club, 48 years in business. Don't forget to visit our website, wineofthemonthclub.com. Folks, have a great time out there in the wine world. Cheers.